Two ideas ascendant in the culture are making us question the nature of reality. The many worlds interpretation, MWI, of quantum mechanics posits that alternate dimensions exist, while the simulation argument states that probabilistically, we are currently living in a simulation. On the surface, these two ideas are not linked. They spring from different fields of science and philosophy and are not formally connected, i.e., the probability that one is true does not affect the probability that the other is true. I'm going to suggest, however, that they are related in their psychological effects. These psychological effects carry a hidden cost, which is best revealed through an analysis of how the MWI, many worlds interpretation, and simulation hypothesis are dealt with in fiction. Welcome to Art of the Covenant. Today I'll be reading an essay written by Dr. Jack DeHavis, a neuroscientist studying how the brain controls movement, and who happens to be a very good friend. So much so that I call him brother now, seeing as I lived with him and his family during my early homeless years. He has been trusted counsel, like my sidekick, I would say, capable of complex philosophical chats, comforting guidance with wisdom and absurdist comedy. He's maybe smarter than me. Don't tell him I said that. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this podcast, so he'll never know. For now, I'll let him stew in his own perceived stupidity. Anyone can be a doctor, okay? All it takes is years and years of careful and concise academic work. I haven't got time for that. I'm busy with... There's loads of stuff I'm doing. My rehabilitation would have been very difficult without his friendship, and I am grateful. Although in moments of paranoia, I would find myself amused that I, the patient from such sudden neurological adversity, was in close proximity to a doctor of brains. His advice, like lines of code capable of programming my path forward, as if he had a part to play in the wiring of my axons and dendrites. Maybe somehow, somewhere in the parallel membranes of the universe, he is the Doctor and I his monster. But let us all remember what happened to Victor Frankenstein. He traveled to the Arctic to escape from the creature he rebuilt from scraps of death, sexy creature, and he got sick with pneumonia and died. So, be warned, I'm a bad boy. I'm such a naughty boy that people might flee to a desert of ice just to get away. Oh, that explains why I'm single. Anyway, let's assume that my best friend has my best intention, and I'll do my best to read his complicated essay with lots of big words. I bet he used a thesaurus loads on the psychological effects of the many world interpretations, MWI, many worlds interpretation, and the simulation hypothesis, which brought me comfort when I was lost in my own mind. There is a passage towards the end of Philip K. Dick's 1962 alternate history novel, The Man in the High Castle, where Tagomi, a trade minister stationed in Japanese-occupied San Francisco, meditates his way into an alternate reality, where the United States won the war. He wanders around in a dazed state, finds a diner, and is affronted by the white patrons who do not immediately offer up their seats. As readers, we are given time to consider whether this alternate reality represents an inner or outer truth. Another late section of the novel addresses the same question. The female protagonist, Juliana, meets with the titular man in the high castle, who explains that his novel within the novel, The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, was composed with the aid of the I Ching, and that its details regarding an alternate history in which the US was victorious indeed represent an inner truth. Contrast this with the more gripping but possibly less metaphysically ambitious television adaptation beginning in 2015. Here Tagomi really. I'm gonna sometimes make mistakes because there's just too many words. He could have used this essay. He could have put some pictures. Here Tagomi really does travel to an alternate dimension and in fact recovers a film of the Bikini Atoll hydrogen bomb test, which is then used to stave off nuclear annihilation in his reality. Later, we are told there are numerous other dimensions, which are presented as increasingly real as the series progress, and even rendered as a full-on, unnecessarily glittery model of the multiverse. The novel within a model motif is replaced by films within a film. Further deviations from the source material compound this effect, and the theme of the inner journey is repeatedly stifled by the more attention-grabbing outward journeys to other worlds. Reading the novel leaves the impression that one's sense of history and self-identity resides in the interlacing of journeys taken and untaken. Making these realities external, as in the TV show, generates a different feeling, a sense that our world is somehow diminished by these acts of branching. In the half-century between the publication of The Man in the High Castle and its TV adaptation, the many worlds interpretation, MWI, of quantum mechanics has risen from obscurity to the mainstream of physics. The MWI states that aspects of quantum weirdness, such as particles being in two places at once, cats being both dead and alive, etc., are not byproducts of the act of measurement. The cat is both dead and alive at the same time, but exists in separate universes or worlds. Quantum experiments allows us to peek into these alternate realities at the scale of the very tiny, but these worlds are unknowable at larger scales due to quantum decoherence. Adherents claim that this multiverse is both real and infinite, meaning that all permutations of matter. So I've not seen that word in quite a while, and just my brain was like, what's that word? Say it properly. Permutations. All permutations of matter exist, and there are infinite versions of you out there. These realities are fundamentally sealed off from one another, so roaming the multiverse is impossible given the laws of physics as currently understood. There is something wantonly profligate. Profligate? Oh, use easier words, mate. I don't even know what profligate means. Honestly, this doctor of brains, he keeps showing off with big words. Let's see what profligate means. Profligate. Adjective describes someone who is recklessly extravagant. Yeah, like the doctor of this thesis. Use easier words. Know your audience. Okay. A person who is recklessly extravagant. All right, let's go back to that. There is something wantonly profligate in the idea of universes constantly budding off one another in amoeboid fits. Amoeboid fits. That said, reality doesn't care what I think about its constitution, and the aesthetics of a theory have little to say about its truth value. Besides, as any physicist reading will have worked out, yes, I don't know what I'm talking about, despite clocking up numerous hours on YouTube watching Sean Carroll and Al doing their best to astound. Readers are directed elsewhere for informed discussions of the MWI. My gripe is with the effects of the MWI has on culture and on the minds of non-physicists. Its effects on the minds of physicists is surely a murkier topics for lucubration. Lucubration? Lubratation. At the very least, we're learning new words today. Wait, what's that? Honestly, he should definitely not write a children's book. Lucubration is a noun that refers to intense study or laborious work, especially done late at night. God, such a good word. Such a good word. Okay. Where are we? Oh, there's loads of pages left on this essay. Bear that in mind, dear listener. I, if you like, am your conduit, translating this jargon, this scientific jargon, into more plebeian, plebeian and palatable uh, uh, stuff. Okay. The effect of the MWI on the psyche is like a balloon being inflated and released to spatter about at a funeral. Imagining the multiverse is initially exciting, transgressive even. Who could be unmoved by the dizzying scale, the freakish amorphous possibilities? In fiction, maverick scientists construct elaborate, though sometimes conveniently faulty, portal devices to tear asunder the fabric of reality. Yet when they enter the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, a little quote there from Hamlet, well done, they are typically greeted by one of two alternatives. Either the new world is basically the same as ours, with some minor plot-serving differences, or it is surreal and chaotic in a manner that devolves into a postmodern deconstruction of narrative. In the first camp, we have a sci-fi adventure like Sliders, with its voyage and thwarted return narrative, and palaver over oiled and unoiled gates. The show thrived on the disposability of each world, bored by the episode where scientists are treated like sports stars. Don't worry, over on the next world there'll be dinosaurs, etc. Each world differed a little from our own, but overall the changes were orderly and usually designed to highlight a particular aspect of character development within the group of interdimensional travelers. Conflict would inevitably be resolved with just enough time for each member of the oddly proportioned cast to fling themselves into the 90s CGI wormhole that closed out of the episode. There is, it should be noted, something ADHD like in the constant channel hopping from world to world in this type of fiction. A protagonist flits. Never seen that word either. A protagonist flits about seeking their ideal home from a series of comprehensible alternatives. How does the unconscious mind process the information? The message, the message seems to be that if you feel uneasy in this world, you should change other people so that they fit better with you. I read this essay in my mind just yesterday before doing this podcast, and oh god, it went so smooth in my mind. Oh, I was reading it like an absolute pro. But now I have to use my mouth, and that's a muscle. Is it one muscle? Maybe more than one muscle. I see why Trump has a hard time doing speeches. It's just, when stuff comes out of your mouth, in your head, smooth operator. It's like butter, but coming out of my mouth. It's like if a vagina could talk. It would just. I regret saying that. I immediately regret saying that. But you know what I mean. It would sort of the words would sort of struggle. Um, should I cut that out? No, keep it for authenticity. People like authenticity. Okay, well, I immediately regret saying that. Um, but in a way, isn't that a lesson for us all? Huh? Because sometimes things just happen, and the conduit regrets it. But is it the conduit's fault? Am I just merely in a stream of consciousness? I don't know. Just shut up. If you're listening to this, thank you, and shut up. Okay. The criticism that alternate worlds always have minor, nakedly plot-serving differences to our own reality cannot be leveled at Rick and Morty. Watching the first two series was an exhilarating experience precisely because the show seemed to get the comedic horror of the MWI. There is an acute thrill to be had from seeing an anthropomorphic pickle control his cockroach exoskeleton by licking its insectoid neural tissue. Successful episodes were grounded in psychological realism, rendered all the more affecting by their queasy cladding of body horror. The alternate worlds in Rick and Morty are shocking, puerile, full of non sequiturs, and thought provoking chaos. Rick and Morty is undeniably postmodern. Any time a conventional narrative or character arc begins to unfold, it is immediately undermined and ridiculed. Sci-fi and fantasy tropes are mercilessly taken apart, both structurally and at the level of individual jokes, as in the deliberately lazy naming of otherworldly characters and objects, aliens called gloopy glop, etc. In one episode, Morty naively badgers Rick to allow him to lead an adventure in a fantasy world of Jack and a Beanstalk, which culminates in a tavern populated by fairy tale creatures, one of whom, King Jellybean, tries to sexually assault Morty in the pub's toilet. We are prevented from detaching from the events because the tone rapidly shifts to one of realism, and the characters' fears are treated as credible. In moments of sincerity, trauma, and anguish, Rick and Morty circumvents some of the ironic distancing and insincerity typical of postmodernist fiction, as detailed by David Foster Wallace's essay E Unibus Plurum. Yeah, I'm not going to read that one. But the effectiveness of these sudden tonal gear changes in Rick and Morty lessens with repetition. This is a specific problem of deconstructive fiction, which is always circumspect about world building. Without solid foundations of location and character, emotion tends to dissipate quickly. If characters and events can be undermined at any moment, the brain naturally regards information about those elements as being of limited importance. As the characters themselves begin to recede in importance, the deconstructive elements of the writing comes to dominate, followed by an attendant cynicism. I feel like I'm standing in front of the class and the teachers said, okay, who'd like to read just a couple of lines from the book? And I went, oh, I'd like to read a couple of lines from the book, please, sir. And then I read, and then the teacher looks at me, fixes his eyes directly into my soul and goes, and now you're going to read the whole fucking book. In front of the class? Yes, in front of the class. What? This is complicated, sir. I thought we were just going to do 2 lines. So we are left with a conundrum. On the one hand, if multiverse fiction tries to respect the tenets of narrative, it comes off as disingenuous. Yet if it is truthful to the chaotic nature of an infinite multiverse, it enters the territory of hard postmodernism and metafiction. Why is this the case? I'm going to take a little break here. I'm going to take a little pause. Maybe I'll do a call to action. Apparently in business, you're supposed to do a call to action like, hey folks, hey, have you considered subscribing to this podcast? And fucking do it and share it to your mates. I'm sick of seeing my analytics have just plateaued. Which obviously, thank you to all of you listening. You are my true children. But I need more. Daddy needs more subscribers, so I can actually, get some sponsors and just get paid. Look, Daddy doesn't want a real job, okay? So make sure that Daddy can stop calling yourself Daddy. Okay, fine. Just I'm gonna take a little break now. Thank you. Okay, I'm back. Maybe you press pause and just had yourself a little break as well. I poured myself a mug of wine. I don't have any wine glasses yet, so it's a mug. And I bought a wine called Journey's End. I'm still not... my palate is not attuned yet to the terroir of the wine or the grape type. You see, I do not know if it is a Malbec or a Merlot. I don't know why I'm doing a French accent. I'm French. Je ne sais pas c'est quoi le vin, le type de vin. I do not know what type of wine it is. I buy solely on what the wine is called. And this one was called Journey's End. I was like, oh, yeah. Studying storytelling right now. Yeah, Journey's End wine. We're nearing the end of season 1 of this podcast. I was like, oh yeah, fucking Journey's End wine. So I will be drinking that while continuing to read this essay with too many words. Actually, too many words. Not only too many words, but like, let me have a look now. Ambivalence. Oh, use easier words, mate. Midnight. Library. These are words coming up in what I'm about to read. I didn't, by the way, I didn't have a practice run through of the essay. Um, I have done. I've done no professionalism in terms of reading this essay, so it might actually be a worse reading, or it might be a better one thanks to the grape juice that I'm reading. And in a way, yeah, judge me for drinking wine. This is Art of the Covenant. It's got some religious connotations. I'm simply drinking what Jesus would drink. Oh, he loved wine. Alcoholic, that guy was. Which makes sense, actually. When you've seen it all, when you're like, when you've got the pressure, when you've got to shoulder the responsibility of humanity, you'd want a glass of wine at the end of the day. There's no doubt. All right, let's get back into the let's get back into the old essays of No World, Many Worlds. All right, let's do it. Ready? Strap in and. Conventional fiction rests on deep structures laid down over thousands of years and on archetypal knowledge arising from biology. There are innumerable tacit rules to which we all have access: good versus evil, the hero's journey, time's arrow, the immutability of death, etc. All rules can be broken and manipulated: anti-heroes, time travel, ghosts, but this is usually done sparingly, i.e., reality is violated in some way and then must be put back together. Fictional multiverses blast through those rules wholesale, leaving only the surface features of the story as usable fodder. Example, jokes about the conventions of genre fiction. Death is a particular problem with a fictional multiverse. If new versions of characters can arrive from alternate dimensions, how can dying carry any weight? Rick and Morty would not have worked if at all if it did not confront death so frequently. However, this confrontation usually explored the immediate effects of corporeal degradation, such as characters burying eviscerated versions of themselves in garden graves. A peculiar but not especially lasting form of empathy is generated by these set pieces. In the TV adaptation of The Man in High Castle, deaths are frequent and brutal. The occupying Japanese and Nazi forces crush resistance fighters with gas and torture prisoners with abandon. These atrocities consistently shock. But as the multiverse aspect of the narrative swells, a faint whiff of ambivalence begins to trail in their wake. Not only are there faceless villains, they each have infinite copies of themselves, so who cares? These subtle effects on empathy result from the limitations of fictional depictions of the multiverse, but they may also presage a deadening of affect that comes with the acceptance of the MWI in the culture at large. Personality, too, is hard to pass with the fictive multiverse. We are wired to see people as individuals. In most fictional multiverses, alternate versions of the same character look identical. Any large departure would be maddening for an audience to keep track of. Personality, instead, is usually allowed to vary. The point being that small differences in our life history can lead to radically different outcomes. This compelling idea that minor decision can end up in momentously different life outcomes is a popular trope in fiction, particularly those narratives dealing with death. Example, Matt Haig's The Midnight Library, and time travel, Back to the Future. Traversing these different realms allows us to see what would have happened if we had acted differently, which is appealing both for straightforward reasons of exploration and possibility, and for deeper reasons probably having to do with causation and free will. Psychologically, after every life decision, there is a feeling that we could have acted otherwise. For example, I voted Labour, but I could have voted for the Conservatives. That's for the Americans. I voted Democrat, but I could have voted for the Republicans. The feeling of free will is illusory. The awareness of making the decision proceeds from the decision itself, while other processes precede the decision, which are typically unconscious. So just when Jack first told me that, it was bewildering. So he did tests where participants had to do an action, and in the brain, that action, if you like, was seen um, seen electrically. I don't know. I don't quite have the words for it, but it was seen in the brain scans before, if you like, the conscious awareness was aware of it. So that would suggest that decisions are made before, quote unquote, I am aware of it. I have a theory on that I'll discuss in the next episode. But yeah, so that's what he's saying is like the awareness of making the decision proceeds from the decision itself. Oh, maybe that wine's already gone to my head. Counterfactual modes of thinking and alternate reality fiction allows us to escape the bind of causation. We have a strong desire to meet these other versions of ourselves, even if, as described by David Eagleman in his story Subjunctive, in some Tales from the Afterlives, living with all our possible selves would be infinitely depressing. The failures would be disdained from their laziness, and the successes envied for their good fortune. The idea that each world has a you who has cultivated a personality from the soil of their life choices is hazardous for two reasons. Firstly, it is overly constructivist. Major life events, births, marriages, deaths, unquestionably leave their mark on our lives, but the effects are unpredictable and chaotic. Chaotic in a formal sense, in that the outcomes are sensitive to small changes in initial conditions. For individuals, the complexity of the psyche negates meaningful prediction about how such events will shape their future personality, while back constructions after the fact are often transparently fanciful. Research is increasingly finding that the most significant nature-nurture interactions are often well beyond the sphere of life decisions. Example, the effect of prenatal cortisol, autoimmune destruction of nerve tissue, or gut microbial serotonin release. Contrast this with the cosplay version presented in multiverse fiction, where every life choice can rewire the cortex and you can select your own personality from the great space-time wardrobe. Such a model of personality might be dangerous if it makes people try to change the unchangeable, whilst ignoring these defects that could be gradually improved. Integration is another personality-related issue in multiverse fiction. Within many psychological traditions, example, Jungian psychodynamic, there is an emphasis on pulling together the many sub-personalities that exist within a psyche. Even from a strictly neurobiological perspective, it is acknowledged that separate system in the brain, play circuitry, approach avoidance, food motivation, etc., have their own goal states, which must be brought into alignment for healthy functioning. The separate versions of an individual within the multiverse are not strictly analogous to these sub-personalities, but it's likely the brain treats them that way since it has no other frame of reference. We identify with the protagonist in these stories, yet they are by definition fractured. From a therapeutic standpoint, this is worrying. These characters are fundamentally split, with little hope of unity. Storytelling binds individuals and cultures. Like any restraint, the grip of existing modes of narrative can be unhealthily tight. So far, I have argued that multiverse fiction can have negative effects on the mind because it devalues individual lives, presents overwhelming yet unattainable choice, destabilizes itself through involution and deconstruction, and presents a flawed and maladaptive view of personality. This is only one side of the argument. If it transpires that the MWI is correct, and that somehow navigating the multiverse is scientifically feasible, then, as has always been the case, fiction will need to spearhead cultural acceptance. Fantastical voyages to far-off lands, of the kind satirized by Swift in Gulliver's Travels, and the 19th century sci-fi of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, ushered in forthcoming ages of discovery. The perversity of one age becomes passé in the next. Aren't multiverses narratives, for all their flaws, just the vanguard of fiction, charting the outer limits of current understanding? Perhaps, but it is a strange kind of outer limit. Oh my days, there is so much more to this essay. I'm gonna take another little break and then we'll get back to it. I mean, it's a good essay, but just streamline it, bruv. Do you know what I mean? Like, say what you've got to say in 2 sentences. That's the kind of society we're in right now. People don't read books, man. Everyone's just all they want is bite-sized clips of someone. Who is that person in 2 sentences? Obviously, it's more complicated. And thank you for joining me on this read-through of my friend's essay. The Outer Limit charged. Wait, no. Oh, I've already got. I've got the 4th word wrong already. This is only my 2nd mug of wine. Just so you know, everyone, we haven't even made it halfway through. Okay. It's a good essay, though. It's good. You gotta know it. This is why. You see, this is why my doctor friend is my sidekick. He doesn't really understand people. There's too many words, mate. All my podcast episodes have been 30 minutes long. We're already in the 30-minute mark. Like, you know, I don't know what universe you exist in where people are happy to listen to stuff for an hour. Not me, baby. I'm all about the half an hours. But I don't want to split this in 2 because I've got ideas ruminating, bubbling under the surface for episode 10. So gotta get through it. It's not chore. I know it sounds like I'm portraying that as a chore, but I really like what he's got to say. But like I said, too many words. I've read the Bible, and I'm saying this is too many words. Okay. The Outer Limit, charted by multiverse fiction, is differed from previous expansions. It is non-spatial. This mirrors the wider culture. We have stopped moving outwards, both metaphorically, with the death of grand narratives that followed the collapse of communism, and literally, with the relative stagnation of the space program. I'll venture that the cogency of inward movements, the kind of grand spiritual discoveries undertaken by 1960s truth seekers, has also been irreparably damaged, in part by the hypocrisy, selfishness, and naivete of their proponents. Only lateral movement remains, movement into a corpuscular realm that is neither internal nor external. This is the realm of multiverse fiction, where metaphors relating to external space are rendered literal in the psyche. Branching decisions equals branching worlds. And the psyche itself is splashed across infinite external space, i.e. the innumerable yous. Long term, this could be a necessary adjustment. Veracity of the MWI aside, virtual reality, network technology, and human-machine interfacing may create a world that is psychologically indistinguishable from the multiverse. For example, imagine VR technology that is fully immersive and coupled to a pharmacological intervention that radically alters time perception. How would one integrate the lives lived inside the simulator with the outside base reality? It might pay to be mentally prepared for this coming world. Yet, in preparing for such a world, we could also be acting as its incubator. We may be hastening the process of building simulated realities by imagining their consequences, while simultaneously coming to terms with the growing feeling that we ourselves are merely simulated. From Plato's cave to Chuang Tzu's oniric butterfly, oniric butterfly, Oneric. That's not even a word. He just made that up to make himself sound smart. Skepticism of reality is a constant strand of philosophy. The prevalence of such ideas suggests a biological origin. Most likely, they are a byproduct of the dualities of consciousness, dreaming versus waking, mind versus matter, subjective versus objective, etc. In the modern incarnation of the simulation argument proposed by Nick Bostrom, vague skepticism is replaced by axiomatic statements. 1. Computing power increases rapidly, perhaps exponentially. 2. Our forebears will run ancestor simulations. 3. Consciousness is substrate independent and therefore easily rendered once computing power reaches a certain threshold. So, given these existing trends and interests, we can say with high probability that any advanced society will simulate vast numbers of conscious minds. If this is possible, we must assume that it has already happened, and on the balance of probabilities, conclude that we ourselves are simulated. There are numerous critiques of the simulation argument, picking apart the solidity of each of its axioms. Perhaps computation will slow down, or maybe civilizations inevitably destroy themselves before they are sophisticated enough to run ancestor simulations. Or what if consciousness is actually dependent on the wetware of the brain? Computation is not enough, and some versions of pan panpsychism? Panpsychism. What a great word. Panpsych or maybe, wait, let me read that again. And some version of panpsychism is shown to be correct. Well, I'm going to have to Google this bloody panpsychism. I don't actually use Google anymore. I use ChatGPT just to see what it flows easier. Panpsychism is a philosophical view that posits that consciousness, mind, or soul is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of the universe. Panpsychism. Panpsychism. Am I saying it properly? Cosmopsychism. So many words I don't know. Beautiful, isn't it? Isn't language beautiful? Anyway, none of these criticisms seem especially reassuring. The simulation hypothesis grows in credibility and influence. There are TED Talks by Nobel Prize winning physicists claiming to present evidence that we live in a simulation, while public figures in tech and science are happy to say that they find in simulation argument compelling. Example, Elon Musk and Neil deGrasse Tyson. As with the MWI, my purpose is not to present evidence for or against the simulation argument, though it should be obvious I'm an adherent of neither idea. Rather, I want to set forth some possible downstream effects of believing in such concepts. The Matrix, 1999, has its dubious honor, along with The Truman Show, 1998, of attaining such a state of ubiquity among the misapprehensions of psychotic patients that some clinicians have argued these delusions should be recognized as new disorders in their own right. A wonderful idea, entirely in keeping with the rigor and economy of the DSM-5. I think DSM-5 is the book to do with like diagnosing mental disorders, if I'm correct. And by the way, those two movies came just before the fear of what's the thing that happened? The Millennium Bug, the fear that the year 2000 would suddenly lead us all into a new age of chaos because the computers couldn't know what the year 2000 was or something dumb like that. But interesting. What makes mentally unwell people believe they are stuck inside these films? Hey, hey, come on. Oh, come on, I'm not mentally unwell. What makes mentally unwell people believe they are stuck inside these films, that their reality is either a computer program or TV show? First, they are compelling stories, with empty vessels leading men who suffer in a manner that exhorts the viewer to action rather than pity. These movies reward close attention and the searching out of hidden details. They have a revealed quality and are full of religious symbolism, omnipresent sky gods, sacrifice of oneself for mankind, etc. Both films are highly influenced by the writing of Philip K. Dick and feature his signature trope. A dark-haired woman arrives at the door of an ordinary man and tells him his world is illusory. This archetype, this chaotic female embodiment of nature, is an alluring call to arms, whose influence grows in proportion to the state of disassociation felt by the viewer. Thomas Anderson lives in a sickly world of glass and sorry, the sentence was, you know what? I'll say it. The sentence was bad. No, I'm joking. The storytelling narrator is almost drunk. Thomas Anderson, i.e., Neo, lives in a sickly world of glass and plastic, while Truman Herbert. You see, there should have been a comma. Actually, I feel like there should have been a comma. I'll put it out there. I think there should have been a comma there. Thomas Anderson lives in a sickly world of glass and plastic, comma, while Truman Burbank is confined to a manicured 50s nightmare. Sorry, I'm just being a dick, just in case Jack is listening. I'll just being a dick. Nature has been subdued until a tree root pushes through the concrete. Unfortunately, rather than pursuing an interpretation about the irrepressibility of nature, many viewers are swept up in a narrative and come to believe something similar is literally occurring in their lives. The Matrix and The Truman Show are versions of the simulation idea, riding high on 90s ennui, reality television, mass surveillance, and the utopian promise of the internet. They contain influences which, if you follow the logic of Thomas Pynchon's novel Bleeding Edge, culminate in a pair of Boeing 767s hitting the Twin Towers and a society left to trawl through ghostly online worlds for the echoes of American totalitarianism. Of the two films, The Matrix is closer to Nick Bostrom's idea, as its characters are wired into a virtual world. These characters do, however, have physical bodies. They are being used as human batteries by machine intelligence. Oddly, this makes the Matrix trilogy a more optimistic version of reality than the one implied by the simulation argument, since having a body at least gives some possibility of escape, even if it is into a world of grey cashmere, bearded necklace, and cavernous raves with the aesthetic of a deodorant commercial. Being the one person to truly see through the bullshit of life and to then redeem others is a fundamental drive. It is the purest form of heroic journey, whereby those of visionary, Gnostic, monastic, or indeed cultish persuasion must enter the hinterlands of the psyche and return with what they have gleaned. The reward is to be labeled delusional and die in a state of alienation, perhaps leaving a few acolytes to pass on the message. Delusional and biased thinking are common and necessary for well-being. 80% of men think they are above average drivers. If the delusions are about reality, though they tend to be detrimental, the dangerousness of a delusion, both to an individual and society, depends on an interplay between the fanaticism of the believer and the flexibility and confidence of the host society. This is why in a creaking Roman Empire, Christianity could be persecuted, even as hundreds of other cults skyrocketed in popularity. When dangerous people believe the world is a simulation, they can end up doing terrible things, such as nihilistically killing their parents, as discussed in the film A Glitch in the Matrix. But transposed to a different milieu, these people would have committed the same crimes under different delusions. Most people who propound the simulation argument do not resort to filial unplugging, despite all those tempting Sunday afternoons spent gazing through their parents' translucent faces at the galloping lines of code. Is then the simulation argument may be harmless, at least according to the at least according to this killing of parents metric I seem to be advocating. Isn't it just another zeitgeisty idea that appeals to the perennially suggestible, like flying saucers in the 50s or the fin de siècle fad for seances? In short, no. The simulation argument is more central to the culture, i.e., taken seriously within academia and tech. And unlike aliens and the paranormal, its existence is partly within our control. Our simulation are progressing at pace. We may have passed a point of no return. I can relate to that. The sense that simulations are inevitable fuels the idea that we already dwell in the scripted realm and prompts some to embrace teleological and quasi-religious accounts of existence. True, a designed simulated reality could be said to have more inherent purpose than a base reality hewn from the void and gnawed at by entropy, yet the purpose is all external. Dreaming of such a reality frees you from nature, but delivers you mewling and hogtied to genuflect before Overlord Coders and his pearl-smattered laptop. Imagine vivisectionists telling all the lab animals why they were born. Oh, that's a good sentence. Imagine vivisectionists telling all the lab animals why they were born. A revealing God would soon become sadistic when forced to wallow in the pathetic suffering of their creations. Clearly, the standard arguments against religion, example, a prurient tyrant God, prurient. I'm just going to double check what prurient means. I'm assuming it's something maybe like prudent. Prurient. Prurient is an adjective used to describe an excessive or inappropriate interest in sexual matters. Oh. It often carries a negative connotation, suggesting that the inherent is lewd, lascivious, or morally questionable. Prurient. Okay. Where was I? Example, a prurient tyrant god who kills babies via AIDS, eye parasites, and infant cancers. Also applied to this take on this simulation argument, minus the thousands of years of scholarship, art, and communal history that religion has in its favor. One of the difficulties of reading such a heavy essay, unless having repeated a read through, I mean, as an actor, you read a script and then you're meant to read it so many times that it flows out of you with more coherence. Potentially, that there's value in a first read through because it's like the eyes are happening against the text and swiftly must convey the message to the brain and then to the mouth. And that's why, like, as I'm reading it, I'm finding myself not having the kind of rhythm that potentially the essay requires. But there's a kind of enjoyment in the first allowed read through. But of course, as an actor, I should be. I'm not going to read this again. I mean, I might read it again for enjoyment. What I mean is, I'm unlikely to read this aloud again, and so should I have been more careful? Should I have read this aloud a few times before reading it to you? The truth is, I have other things to get on with in my life, just as you do. And so I hope that this podcast, not just this episode, but this podcast is of value to you. I hope you enjoy it. I'm certainly enjoying exploring life through art, and I look forward to doing so in future seasons. I think each season I might tackle a particular subject or something. Okay. There's a bit more, but we're almost there, and I hope you're enjoying my friend's essay. I mean, it's certainly well constructed and carefully, carefully constructed. But I may not have done it justice. I think if you were to read it just for yourself in your mind, it would flow much nicer. And maybe I haven't done it justice. So forgive me, but also shut up. That's a good argument, isn't it? Shut your mouth, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to have a little quick sip of wine. Mm. 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 Okay, let's bang this out. Bang it out. Another notion buried in a simulation argument is that simulated reality can set you free. The logic runs something like, if it's all just simulated, then why be anxious? Why worry about the petty shit? Nothing is real, so you're free to be anything. This position seems equally untenable. Either in your knowledge of the simulations influences its form, akin to prayer and interventionist deity, or as the statement usually appears, simply by knowing the true nature of things you are freed from suffering, an idea which could be charitably compared to a kind of modern Gnosticism. Either way, such beliefs lead up to the exact same blind alleys as religion. Admittedly, comparisons of the simulation argument to a religion are overblown. People may think simulation is possible in an abstract sort of way, but that's not the same as true belief. It's not a yet type of belief people go to war over. That doesn't mean things aren't heading in that direction, with the simulation argument being perhaps a sub-doctrine of the kind of religion that seems to be forming around big data, an algorithmic view of existence, and the idea that information wants to be free, as detailed by Yuval Noah Harari in Homo Deus. Perhaps that happens, and while the paradigm shifts, we are likely to experience some discomfort as the simulation argument subtly shapes our unconscious minds ahead of a wholesale takeover. The creeping influence of the simulation argument might show up first as a kind of neural paralysis within individual minds. To act, we have to simulate. Planning a movement as simple as lifting your arm requires the computation of internal models of multiple joints and muscles. The brain builds simulations of desired ends, states of the body, and works backwards from these models to derive the correct movement commands to achieve those states. Simulations of simple movements feed into more complex simulations of proximal and distant goals. Dream jobs, relationships, holidays, whatever. It's all found on a series of constructions. Subjective, yes, but anchored to reality by the physical limitations of the body. Perception itself is now understood by most neuroscientists to be a form of simulation, looping, recursive, imposed from within, and only sparingly updated by external data. The brain has evolved to trust these internal simulations in a manner that is optimal for survival. Now insert into these internal simulations an additional layer of suspected world simulation. Surely the system must learn to trust its internal models less, since they now pertain to an outside world that is also simulated, and by extension, less firm and reliable. If we trust our predictions less, we will find it harder to act, make goals, and progress. Similar to how people often feel lost after being betrayed by a friend or spouse. The world is unsafe. Things are not what they seem. I should retreat. When one imagines that the fabric of reality can dissemble, one feels that all the gravity of life is siphoned out, that to take a step forward is to plunge in all directions at once, yet to move nowhere. Admittedly, distrust in reality can also cause a beneficial loosening of our prior predictions about the world. Something similar to how 5-HT2A, or I think that's a type of hallucinogens, are thought to promote learning and openness through a loosening of Bayesian priors. However, I think it equally likely that maladaptive cortical resonances will develop as the brain struggles to second-guess itself and builds even more contingent simulations. The simulated nature of reality could perhaps only be modeled using our own simulations as a crude mirror. I hope you understand why I chose to read this essay that my friend wrote in 2021. It made so much sense to me. In amnesia, in a complete loss of all memories, I lost all concept of reality. And so to return to a not just a base reality for myself, one that exists within me and in my body, but one that I share with others, has been and is still difficult. And I suppose what I appreciate about this essay is that it is written by someone who really knows what he's talking about. Now, yes, multiverse theory and simulation hypothesis isn't necessarily his branch of academia, but he's an incredibly smart man, as you can tell, and I was incredibly grateful to have someone who is cerebral at heart explain something that at the very least made what happened to me seem normal. But my normal is steeped in this complex unknowing. And so I hope you understand why I felt it important to include this essay in my exploration of the self and in my reconstruction of Eric. For some, apprehending simulated realities in the multiverse seems more energizing. Philip K. Dick is an interesting case in point. Hypergraphia was always part of his life. I like when he uses words like that and doesn't explain what they are. Like he assumes that people know, which in a way is quite cool. It's like Christopher Nolan, who just just assumes you understand how time works. Hypergraphia. Hypergraphia is a medical condition characterized by an overwhelming urge to write. Oh, I like that. People with hypergraphia often produce large volumes of written material, which can range from coherent and creative work to disorganized and excessive scribbling. This condition is typically associated with certain neurological disorders, particularly temporal lobe epilepsy. Well, I don't know if I have epilepsy, but the temporal lobe, yeah, my perception of time has certainly been been toyed with, be it from the inner or outer world. Anyway, hypergraphia was always a part of his life, but it took a profound and inward turn after his revelatory experiences of 1974. These experiences began when he opened to door. He opened to door. Did I spot did I spot a mistake? Experience These experiences began when he opened a door to receive pain medication delivered by the pharmacy because he'd had some teeth out earlier in the day. Anyway, the gold ichthus pendant worn around the neck of the delivery girl sent a light beam in his face, accompanied by a profound burst of information, which included knowledge that both he and the girl were Christians in AD 50, and that simultaneously the Roman Empire had never ended. Over the next few weeks, his became like one of his novels. He hallucinated, performed home baptisms, was told by a pink light that his son had an internal hernia, which proved correct and saved the child's life. Yeah, if you check out Philip K. Dick's life, he actually was, if you like, telepathically told that his son had a hernia, and it turned out to be true. So, you know, the world of, well, our world is just fascinating. For the next 8 years until his death, he wrote incessantly every night about these experiences and their relation to his prior work and to the nature of reality. These pages, some 6,000 in total, have now been edited and published as the Exegesis of Philip K. Dick, relevant to our discussion. He returned to the man in the high castle on many occasions in his Exegesis, musing on and diagramming out its relation to the Taoist idea of the whole being contained within the part, and the ramifications of the Tagomi character entering our world from within his fictional realm. Apologies for stuttering a little. Our words contain the man in the high castle, which contains our world, which contains the man in the high castle, which contains our world, which contains the man in the high castle, which contains ... I set up another paradox, flip-flop, and another, the whole is contained in the part, and the part is contained in the whole. This actually goes back to the joke I said, either the last episode or the one before, about what does the B stand for in Benoit B. Mandelbrot? Well, the answer is Benoit B. Mandelbrot, whose B stands for Benoit B. Mandelbrot. Is it a fake, more fake, or than just a fake or a null fake? Wait, let me read that again. Is a fake more fake than just a fake, or null fake? These meanderings are thought-provoking in places, yet they are also frustrating. As many readers have noted, it is unclear if Philip K. Dick is using the processes to reconstruct himself, or is he undertaking a series of controlled demolitions. There is a sense that, for all the productivity, it was also an overwhelming experience, and friends report that he was often depressed during this period of his life. I am on antidepressants. Mental stagnations certainly is not what comes to mind, though. Rather, as the architect of his own skeptical, looping, contradictory metaphysics, he needed to work at hyperspeed as the interpreter to stay ahead of himself as the creator. This seems to be something like the model of the brain I sketched out, in which an unusual resonance can emerge when the brain's simulation takes seriously a simulated reality. Nothing is as riveting, nothing as empty as a hall of mirrors. Yeah, wow, I read this before, but saying it aloud, there is there certainly is a similarity to my experience. Philip K. Dick is a nexus for ideas relating to multiple worlds and simulations. Like any seer, it is easy to apportion blame if his ideas apparently have negative effects in the wider culture. This is not my intention. I refer to the exegesis from an uninformed, toe-in-the-water type of position, not as a critic. Besides, even aficionados of that work admit that it has a regurgitated quality. The breadth of ideas are dazzling, more for their associative linkages than their originality. My point is that it was not Philip K. Dick or any other individual who got the ball rolling vis-a-vis the MWI, the many worlds interpretations, and simulation. These ideas are latent in the structure of consciousness, in the metaphorical splitting of worlds that occurs when momentous life decisions are made. In a way, we dream forth reality from our cortical simulations. It is all a matter of degree, a question of how literally we take these metaphors and how deeply we should reweave them into fictive landscapes. There is some evidence that we are taking multiple and simulated realities too literally. This manifests primarily as a devaluation and retreat from physical reality. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a noticeable rise in people staying indoors. Children play outdoors far less than they did a generation ago, and there has been a global rise in the phenomena like social anxiety, agoraphobia, and self-imposed isolation. Example, Japan's hikikomori. The causes of these disorders are hard to untangle from the technology that makes them possible. Digital entertainment, social media, online shopping. Technology that is also fueling interest in the simulation hypothesis and the multiverse. Our behavior is reinforcing our perceptions. As we spend less time outdoors, we will inevitably come to value and trust the natural world less. This process appears to be well established, at least in the developed world. I'm going to take a quick sip of my wine. Oh, I would love to hear from you. This is obviously at the moment a one-sided conversation, but you listening, thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for being there. I appreciate it. What I enjoy the most about creating is how people might discover things later in time. Maybe you'll discover this podcast in 10 years' time, in 20, in 30. In 30 years, I'll be 67. And you might get in touch with me and go, oh, I listened to that podcast and I really appreciated it. I really enjoyed it. We might get into a debate. We might get into a conversation. We might open up new doors for me and you. You might discover this podcast when I'm dead. There's something about that which is also quite exhilarating. That in a way, I'm speaking to you from the other side. My physical body might be dead, but I do have an unshakable belief now that consciousness is capable of existing elsewhere, elsewhen. I suppose that's why, again, this essay complements my current evolution. Mm. The journey's end. Okay. Where was I? There's so many words. I've actually lost my... Okay, there we are. True, there has been a rise in conservationism. Why am I struggling with that? Conservationism. No, like a conservatory. Conservationism. Conservationism? I think I'm saying it properly. I'm going to start again. True, there has been a rise in conservationism, and environmentalism over the past half century. But these movements often forefront a naive and a real view of nature. Ecosystems are presented as being harmonious, with animals working together to maintain a perfect state of balance until the virus-like humans stump in and kick the butterflies to death. Meanwhile, evolutionary theorists are treated as fascist for asserting that the whole system is actually a blizzard of competition, sex, and death. Conservationism is a worthy endeavor. Am I saying it right? If I'm not, please let me know. Conservationism is a worthy endeavor, providing we understand the freak show we are trying to save. And don't let our dubious role as custodians trick us into thinking that we are somehow separate from nature. Holding on to the feeling that we are part of nature will become increasingly difficult as we confine endangered species to arc prisons, revivify extinct genera, and laser scan and simulate waning ecosystems. If we also believe that there are infinite worlds and/or that everything is just a simulation anyway, sustaining such a feeling might be impossible. In the social realm, there are two destabilizing phenomena that may owe their animus to the world simulation duplication thing. On the political right, there is a tendency towards conspiracy theories, typified by phenomena like QAnon and a belief in the Illuminati. There is a long-standing tradition within conspiracy circles to think a reality is a hologram or simulation, as in the writings of David Icke. These narratives have now blended with the simulation argument and a general sense of distrust from the existing order. And to this, the disintegration of physical communities, the rise of network technology, the ease with which one can find like-minded individuals online, and numerous widely discussed lurid abuses of power, example the MK Ultra. And you are left with a potent nihilistic brew. Over the next few decades, as ideas relating to simulation appear even more perspicacious. Oh, yum! Perspicacious. I've never said that word in my life. Perspicacious. What does it mean? The word perspicacious is an adjective used to describe someone who has a keen understanding, sharp insight, or the ability to notice and comprehend things that are not immediately obvious. Oh, I like that word. Perspicacious. Yum. My penis actually, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of throbbed a little bit, just like that word. That's that's kind of cool that I'm attracted to sapiosexualism. The societal atomization will metastasize. People will come to have increasingly incoherent notions of reality, underpinned by a sense that calls for objectivity, are the death rattles of shills and salesmen. Crossing the barrier between individual minds to reach political consensus is difficult at the best of times. In a world that is perceived as being simulated, it will become impossible. Shorn of all social bounds, motionless before the screen flicker, we will have finally achieved radical subjectivity, the cold sweat dream of simulation. Meanwhile, on the political left, there exists a preoccupation with identity. People are obsessing over a multiplication of contradictory labels that refer to appearance, sexuality, and gender. These language games originate from critical theorists, offshoots of 1960s-70s postmodernism who deny the possibility of gaining objective knowledge about the world. This cynicism is a far cry from the hopeful tone adopted by advocates of the MWI in physics. Nevertheless, both sets of ideas may be linked via mid-20th century anxieties around mass production and mechanization. The modern world brought a loss of trust in the identity of objects, since any item could be replicated and infinitely copied. The MWI situates the process in reality itself, and by asserting that all worlds are copies of each other, i.e., there is no original world universe, it psychologically resolves the sense of dissonance generated by a world full of uncertain objects. At the same time, advances in genetics mean we are forced to view ourselves as disposable meat wagons piloted by DNA machines. As such, we rely on ever more superficial sources of identity and emphasize personal choice in the domain of language, i.e., identity labels, since this is all we have left to control. With this backdrop, the MWI can appear like a solution. It unifies the plurality of views in the present moment and negates the central role of genetic replicators. But there is a cost. If we come to believe that there really are infinite versions of us, each one glitteringly unique and shaped by nothing more than life choices, it will be increasingly difficult to accept the harsh physical truths that nature bestows. We will construct fantastical identities, beautiful to ourselves, yet unbearable to everyone else. In sum, believing wholeheartedly that our world can be simulated or duplicated is a poisoned chalice. It plays on desires to avoid the suffering of a physical existence, to be radically more than our corporeal form, and to escape the shackles of causation and our suspicion that we lack free will. It satisfies certain religious impulses and brings a spiritual dimension to our technologies of simulation and mass production. And yet, at the same time, we are left disordered. We are overwhelmed by unreal choices and unreal complexity, yet blind to the true complexity of nature and the freedom that comes from a bounded existence. We seem incapable of moving forward. Plans for our futures unpick themselves before they can even be spoken forth. Fiction reveals these tendencies. It can also serve as a means to guide us out of our morass. We need to turn our skeptical lens away from reality and back into manner in which narratives about reality are delivered. In the TV version of The Man in High Castle, the characters watch mysterious films of themselves in alternate dimension. For some, this is paralyzing. For others, the film seems to rob them of all agency, as they are compelled to emulate or reject their doppelgangers. In a novel, this transfer of information is more ambiguous, richer even. This is because reading does not grant the action-perception linkages, the inescapable correspondence that vision affords. It is not for their powers of distortion that mirrors are represented in mythology as gateways to dangerous futures. We must resist the pull of the image. We must not be fooled by virtual reality and our unconscious. We must not be fooled by virtual reality and our unconscious desires to forego our bodily senses, pain, touch, proprioception, for the false freedom of the audiovisual. Nature, in all its opacity, in its commandment that we must act, that we must move back and forth across its pages, should be our lodestone. He ends on a word that I've never come across before, lodestone. It's lodestone, mate. A lodestone is a naturally occurring piece of the mineral magnetite that has magnetic properties. Okay, so that should be our compass, our North Star. Thank you so much for joining me on my read through this essay, and thank you for bearing with me as I had to take pauses and made mistakes. It was quite challenging, actually, but also enjoyable. I could tell that my comedic nature had to step in every now and then and just go, oh, but don't forget, I can be funny, I suppose. While I'm trying to flirt with the edges of my epistemological limitations. Epistemological. Is that the word? Epistemological. I mean, even me struggling with saying epistemological is in itself, I suppose, funny. Did I do it on purpose in a much deeper rooted subconscious? Who knows? But thank you so much. Next week I will be exploring the day that I actually was at the psychiatric hospital. It was quite a funny day, quite a mad, week. I was there for a week. Or I'm still there. That's obviously the constant challenge that I have landed myself in. But hopefully I'll find my roots. Thank you so much. Have a good day. See you next time.